let me turn that off. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. Woo! That was energizing. How are you today? Rosh Hashana is just a few hours away. That was the cast and musicians of our film, When Do We Eat? Singing Shechechyanu, the blessing of the time. That's something we'll be saying on Rosh Hashana, and we'll discuss why momentarily. That's amazing. It comes out on today's page of the Talmud. But I remember recording that. It was just so, when Nina and I imagined that whole story and how the family would be singing together. It's at Passover, but a family singing at a Jewish holiday. And, we wrote the script and then we married it. We were so blessed that we were able to film the movie and share the movie. And it's really become a cult hit and people watch it all over the world as Passover approaches, growing numbers every year. But I remember that we imagined that family singing and that it would be great and uplifting. And then we had, these incredible musicians and singers recording it. And Cinda Williams, who's a character in the movie, an actress who appears in the movie as Grace, but also is just an incredible gospel singer. And at the recording session, she's the featured singer in that recording. I mean, just blew the roof off. All right, how are you? Let's light up the darkness. Okay. Who is with us on this fine Friday as we prepare for Rosh Hashana and squeeze in a little bit of beautiful learning before the holidays upon us? Rafiq Islam Durjoy says, hi. Hello, Rafiq. Melissa Teljurin, good Yom Tov from Great Neck, New York. Guy Thomas Kennedy from Dayton, Ohio. Bill Eldridge, shalom and a blessed Rosh Hashanah. Adrian Smith with us from Columbia Falls, Montana. Shana Tova and shalom. Hillary Strickler from Cincinnati. Sharon Fran Brooks from Lebanon, New Jersey. Chaim Burke is with us. Pauline Michael Shana Tova from Arkansas, wishing you and Nina a healthy and sweet new year. Julie Tischler, Zino Shana Tova Metuka. A good year and a sweet year from Palm Beach, Florida. Chaim is in Charlotte. Brenna Bloomfield in Muncie, New York. Is that a gospel version of Shechechyanu? Yes, it was. Stephen Byer, Chicago. Randy Lieberman, Herman Lashana Tova from Florida. How are you guys? It wasn't a gospel. I mean, it was just the style of the rendition, the singing, and the instruments that we used. And you notice we say Hashem Elokeinu, not the proper name of God and another proper name of God when we're just talking in conversation or singing, not as a blessing for the holiday. We wouldn't say God's name as we would during a blessing. Rather, we say Hashem, the name, or Elokeinu, our God, but we stick that K in the middle so that we would never use God's name in vain. We're always careful to do that, and that's how we made that recording. All right, let's get into it. It's not going to be a long show. I'm sure you all have a lot of preparation to do. I know we do. If you watched Nina's show earlier from the kitchen, you'll recall that she needs beets. So I got to go and fetch the beets. As well as the flowers for the house. All right, this is episode number 258 of AT Daily. We're in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. Today we're doing Daf Mem, that's page 40. We're in chapter 3 and discussing the 10th Mishnah of chapter 3. You'll recall that the Mishnah is all about the fact that Rosh Hashana, right? Amazing, we're discussing Rosh Hashana now, even though we're in a tractate about the laws of Shabbos, just as Rosh Hashana is approaching. So the Mishnah says we may not make a separate Erev Techumen, a separate Shabbos boundary, as it were, the limits of how far we can walk. While we can do that when a festival is adjacent to Shabbos, we can have one Erev in one direction for the festival and another Erev the next day for Shabbos, or vice versa. For the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, we may not divide the holiday and say I'm going to have a geographical Erev in that direction for the first day of Rosh Hashanah and a different Erev in that direction for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, because it is one continuous period of sanctity. That's a little bit surprising because Rosh Hashanah as a Torah holiday, the biblical law of Rosh Hashanah, is that it's just one day. It's the first day of the year. But as we saw historically, even in Jerusalem, they couldn't be sure which day was Rosh Hashana. So from a very early time, much earlier than the other festivals, Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot, became 2-day holidays in the diaspora outside of Israel, which they've been ever since. While in Israel, they remain a 1-day holiday. Much earlier than that, Rosh Hashanah, even in Jerusalem, became a 2-day holiday. That was decreed during the times of the early prophets. Okay. But that discussion that we began yesterday did lead to discussion of other 2-day festivals and the way that they're observed in the diaspora outside of Israel. And so today on our page, we have an incident that took place in Mechoza, which is where the great sage Rava was the authority. He was essentially the chief rabbi of Mechoza. This is in Babylonia. Babylonia, recall, is Bavel, where the Babylonian Talmud is written, the Jewish community of Bavel. But Babylonia at that time was part of the Persian Empire. At any rate, it was a 2-day festival, so you can imagine, let's say, Shavuos, or the first 2 days of Passover, the first 2 days of Sukkot. And so it's a 2-day festival outside of Israel. And during the festival, some merchants, non-Jewish merchants, brought turnips. So there was a shipment of turnips that came into town during the festival. And the question was, as soon as the festival ended, could the Jewish residents of the town purchase the turnips immediately, or did they have to wait the amount of time that it would have taken for these turnips to be brought from where they were harvested, which was outside the Erev Techumen, outside the Shabbos boundaries, outside the geographic limit of how far you can walk on Shabbos or the festival. And so after the festival is over, do we have to wait the amount of time it would have taken to transport those turnips from where they originated to Mechoza before the Jewish residents were permitted to buy them? Rava ruled that they could buy them immediately. And there were 2 reasons for that. Number one, that he looked at the turnips themselves and they were pretty withered, so that he could see that they weren't picked during the festival. They had been picked sometime before. Why does that matter? Because harvesting, right, cutting something from the ground or from a tree, is prohibited both on Shabbos and a festival. We can cook on a festival, but all other forms of labor prohibited on Shabbos are also prohibited on the festival. Clearly, though, these turnips had not been picked during the festival. They'd been picked several days before. Second reason that it was permitted is that the turnips were not brought for the Jewish residents. They were brought just to town, right? So there were many Gentiles who lived in that town as well. So it was not that it was a prohibited labor of bringing something from outside the boundary was done on behalf of a Jew. Even if you don't request the non-Jew to do it for you, you can't benefit from that labor. So the law is that if it's brought to a Jew, right, that the Gentile wanted to be nice and he brought these turnips to a Jew, that Jew cannot benefit from those turnips until after the festival ends and the amount of time has passed that it would have taken to bring it after the festival ended. But another Jew can benefit, right? It wasn't done on his behalf. It's here. It wasn't picked during the festival, so another Jew could benefit from it. In this case, it wasn't brought for any Jew in particular. It was just brought for the town, and so the Jews could benefit from it. Once Rava permitted that, so then things started to change, and the merchants said, oh, well, the Jews are coming out of a holiday. They're hungry. They're going to need produce. Let's bring a bunch of turnips during the holiday, and we can be the first ones to make the sale. And at that point, Rava could see that the merchants were bringing specifically for the Jews, right? They brought those turnips with the Jews in mind. And so then he changed his ruling and said, no, people have to wait. They can't purchase immediately after the festival ends. They have to wait that amount of time that would have taken to bring the turnips from outside the Shabbos limit after the festival ended. So there would be that delay after the festival ended. Okay. And that is the law about that. Okay. if we go back to our Mishnah about this 2-day Rosh Hashana and the fact that we can't have separate Eruvs for the first day and the second day, that Mishnah number 10 that we're discussing now, also included this ruling of Rabbi Dosa ben Harekinos. Harekinos, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but Rabbi Dosa ben Harekinos. And Rabbi Dosa said, that since we're not sure during this 2-day Rosh Hashana which day is the actual first day of the year and which day is extra, right? Because depending on when the witnesses would testify before the Sanhedrin that they had seen the new moon, it was possible that the first day of Rosh Hashana is actually the last day of the previous year, and second day Rosh Hashana is the actual biblical holiday of Rosh Hashana. Or it's possible that they came on time early in the morning and the first day of Rosh Hashana is in fact the first day of the year and the second day of Rosh Hashana is just the second day of the year. So therefore, one of the days, and we're not sure which, is the biblical holiday of Rosh Hashana, and the other day is a sort of fence around the Torah by rabbinic decree. Since we're not sure which day is which, Rabbi Dosa said whoever is the prayer leader in the Rosh Hashanah services, when he gets to the prayer saying to God on behalf of the congregation, "Strengthen us, O Lord, on this day of Rosh Hashanah, whether it is today or tomorrow," right? So Rabbi Dosa said we should add this language, so, indicating that we understand that today might be the actual day or tomorrow might be the actual day. We're going to say it on both days, but adding this sort of conditional language, so that God shouldn't think that we don't know, that we're making a fence around the Torah, but that we want our prayer to be sort of as specific as possible. And the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Dosa said, no, we don't say that. We don't introduce conditional language into our prayers. We just pray to God, strengthen us on this day of Rosh Hashanah, and we say the same language on both days, lest the people come to think that the second day, which is by rabbinic decree, is somehow of a lesser sanctity than the first day. So even though there's a distinction in the 2 days and the sort of underlying reason we pray on each day, nevertheless, both days are equally sacred. And that's an important principle that when the rabbis establish, we're going to be lenient in areas of doubt. But when the rabbis say that something is sacred, it is as sacred as something that the Torah says is sacred. Why? Because the Torah itself gave the rabbis the authority to do that. That's the whole concept of the fact that the Torah says you shall have elders in every generation who will make these kinds of decisions. That right there is the basis for the oral law. Right? Some of the oral teachings were given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Others were added over the 4,000 years that 3,300 years that we've been studying the Torah since it was given at Mount Sinai. But this idea that the rabbis have authority to declare something sacred is very important, right? This is where really, we, the children of God, right? And right now I'm not even saying Jews. I'm saying humankind, the children of God. God has given us the ability to make things sacred, right? When we consecrate, right? It was not limited only to Jews to bring an offering in the Holy Temple when the temple stood in ancient Israel. Non-Jews could bring an offering under certain conditions as well. So if you're bringing an offering, then before you bring it, you're going to set aside that which you're going to bring. For example, you're going to bring an animal to offer as an elevation offering on the altar. So at that moment, when you decide which animal it's going to be, you consecrate that animal. It is now holy. That animal is holy. Before, it was just an animal. Now that you've dedicated to be brought as an offering, it's holy. You have created holiness in that animal. And that's a spectacular truth. It's an amazing thing that God has given us the power to make something holy, right? And this is the same power that we wield when we say blessings, when we make blessings, right? When we bless God, it's sort of like, how could we add anything to God? It's sort of like we give God pleasure. We've talked about this before, that we can give God pleasure. But we also somehow add to God's holiness It's a beautiful relationship that we have. And other things we have the power to make holy. And the word holy in Hebrew, kedusha, is from the root kadosh, which means to separate, right? Holiness literally means to separate from the mundane. And that's very important as we get into the next idea that we're going to talk about today. And that is this. Now that the rabbis were looking at this, asking this question about how the prayers are formulated, and they disagreed with Rabbi Dosa. We don't add this conditional language. Please strengthen us on this day of Rosh Hashana, whether it is today or tomorrow. We don't say that. We just say, please strengthen us on this day of Rosh Hashana, on both first day and second day. And so now that we start examining the formulation of the prayers, the Gemara will look into some other prayers in the prayer book to see what we can learn about the early rabbinic attitude toward the holidays, right? And so one thing that they inspect is the fact that Rosh Hashanah necessarily, because it's the head of the year, also coincides with the head of the month, right? It's the head of the year, and it's also the first day of the first month of the year, the first day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. The question was, do we mention Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month, the new month, because we always bless the first day of the new month on every new month. So are we going to mention Rosh Chodesh in our prayers when we're already blessing Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the year? And the answer is no. It's understood to be included. The blessing of the new moon for the new month is included in the blessing of the new moon for the new year. Now that we were looking at that, and the Gemara examines the additional prayer, the Musaf prayer, which we say on Shabbos, every Shabbos, but when it's Rosh Chodesh or when it's Rosh Hashanah, so then it's a special version of that prayer. That's when Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Chodesh coincides with Shabbos, like it does tomorrow. So tomorrow, the additional prayer, the additional standing prayer, the Musaf Amida, the additional prayer that we say on Shabbos morning, because it's Rosh Chodesh, we say it once a month, or because it's Rosh Hashanah, so we have a special additional prayer for that on Shabbos, and we don't mention both Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Hashanah covers Rosh Chodesh. Having looked at the way that the prayers are formulated in the prayer book, with respect to Rosh Hashanah, we now come to the related question that has really nothing to do with Shabbos, but which is a spectacular question for us to examine. This won't take too long, so if you have questions or comments, put them in the comments now. By the way, if you're listening for the first time, let us know that you're listening for the first time. Nina will put it into the comments. I'd love to welcome you. Okay, so the question is the blessing of the time, the Shechechyanu blessing. So let me read that to you in English and Hebrew. And the question is, do we say Shechechyanu, the blessing of the time, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? That's going to be the question. So the blessing is, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. It's very much a celebratory blessing, right? When we say Shechechyanu, it's a celebration. It's always a celebration, and this is the time to look around at the people who are celebrating with you, God willing, and to celebrate that they're there with you once again, right? That we're all alive and we're able to celebrate this holiday together one more time. And it's not just holidays. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But the blessing is Baruch Atah, and I'm teaching it, so I'm going to say it with God's name properly. Baruch Atah Adonai, blessed are you, God, Eloheinu melech haolam, our God, King of the universe, Shechechyanu, who has kept us alive, right? The one who gives us life. The same root as l'chaim, chayim, life. Chai is life. Shechechyanu, who has given us life, who has kept us alive. V'kiyimanu, and who has sustained us, right? Who has kept us not just alive, but, thank God we're eating, we have shelter, we have clothes, we're well. V'higianu, and who has brought us lazman hazeh, to this season. right? And then everybody says Amen. So that's the blessing. And the question is, we know, it's clear to everybody that we say that blessing when we reach the seasonal festivals, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. We definitely say that blessing for the festivals. So the question is, do we say it for Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur? The reason to say it is that these holidays come once a year, just like Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot. The reason not to say it is that those other three festivals are called the festivals, and specifically the Pilgrim Festivals, when the Torah commands that the people would go up to Jerusalem to celebrate together. It doesn't say that about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So Rabbah asks Rav Huna, do we say Shechechyanu at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And Rav Huna was not sure. The Talmud says he didn't have the answer at hand. It really makes me feel better when questions get asked and I don't have the answer at hand. Rav Huna was one of the great sages in history, and he also wasn't sure. Okay, so Rav Huna was not sure, so Rabbah went to Rav Yehuda, and he says, do we say Shechechyanu at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? So Rav Yehuda, right, of course, Rabbah would ask Rav Yehuda, said, well, I say Shechechyanu over a new gourd, like a new pumpkin. Of course I say it over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So here we should clarify, when do we say Shechechyanu? We make this blessing when we eat the first fruit of the season. If there's an annual fruit that we eat just during annual seasons, the first time we eat that fruit in a year, we can say Shechechyanu. We also say it the first time we do a mitzvah that is an annual mitzvah, like dwelling in the sukkah at Sukkot or shaking the lulav at Sukkot. When we see a friend that we haven't seen in a significant interval, I would say significant means at least more than a year and maybe more than that. So you're so happy to see your friend you haven't seen in such a long time, you can say Shechechyanu. When you purchase a new garment that is significant for you, and I believe this would apply to new jewelry as well. If it's significant for you, you can say Shechechyanu. And when you benefit from a significant event. Those are the times when we say Shechechyanu. So Rav Yehuda says to Rabbah, I say Shechechyanu for all those things, even when I have a gourd, a pumpkin for the first time in the year. Of course I'm going to say it for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And Rabbah says, no, my question isn't, do you say Shechechyanu? My question is, must you say Shechechyanu? It is appropriate to say the blessing at those times. Is it obligated? That's unclear. And the question now is it obligated to say Shechechyanu for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? So Rav Yehuda answered, now I understand your question. Both Rav and Shmuel, who are great sages in the Babylonian Jewish community, a little bit earlier than Rabbah and Rav Yehuda, previous generation, and he says that Rav and Shmuel said it's obligatory only by the Pilgrim Festivals, Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot. However, we have a dispute in this opinion, and we learn that Rabbi Yehoshua holds differently. So Rabbi Yehoshua, much earlier, he's a Tan of the Mishnaic period, and Rabbi Yehoshua says, he expounds a verse from Ecclesiastes, from Kohelet in Hebrew, which says 7. These are the 7 days, give a portion to 7 and also to 8. So in Ecclesiastes is the verse, give a portion to 7 and also to 8. Rabbi Eliezer had said, this refers to the 7 days of creation and 8 refers to the 8 days of circumcision. But Rabbi Yehoshua says that's not how we expound it. We expound that verse to mean that 7, these are the days of Passover, 8, these are the days of the festival of Sukkot, and when it says, and also, we expound like every other instance of the word also in the Torah, and this comes to include Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. So when we say give a portion to 7 and also to 8, according to Rabbi Yehoshua, this teaches that we bless Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur the same way that we bless Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So from that, we learn out that we do say Shechechyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So now the Gemara says, whoa. When we say Shechechyanu, we customarily say it at the same time that we make the Kiddush over wine. In other words, we have a glass of wine at the beginning of that festival, and we celebrate that we're entering that festival in time, right? Not just space, but Eruv is all about space, right? Entering the actual boundary of holiness, an enclosure of holiness. When we make Kiddush, we are sanctifying the day as we enter it in time, right? So we the same way we do with Shabbos, but we don't say Shechechyanu. But when Shabbos begins, we make Kiddush, right? We light the candles before Shabbos begins. And then at Shabbos dinner, we sanctify the day by making a Kiddush over wine. And we do the same at the beginning of Passover, at the beginning of Sukkot, at the beginning of Shavuos. And we're going to do it at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah as well. At the meal, we'll sanctify the day over wine, and we'll say Shechechyanu after the Kiddush, right? At the time that we're drinking the wine, we're going to make the Shechechyanu as well. So the problem is that if you're making Shechechyanu at the same time as Kiddush and you're doing it over wine, how are you going to do that at Yom Kippur when we're fasting, a 25-hour fast for Yom Kippur? So then the Gemara suggests, for Yom Kippur, you can make the blessing over the wine and say Shechechyanu before the actual holiday begins, right? But the problem with that is that we have a tradition, it's a law, that if you make Kiddush early, for example, for Shabbos, so that's when Shabbos begins, right? Once you sanctify the day, even if you do it earlier in the afternoon before the Hebrew days start at nightfall, if you do it early, if you sanctify the incoming holiday while it's still day, so you've taken on the restrictions and obligations of that day early, right? So you're making the holiday longer. Sometimes that's seen as a virtue. But the point is, if you take on Yom Kippur early, so you're starting your fast early. So as soon as you sanctify, you make the blessing over the wine if you made it over wine for Yom Kippur, then you couldn't drink the wine because your fast has begun. So then it says, okay, maybe the way to deal with that is you make the blessing over the wine and you say Shechechyanu, thanking God for sustaining us and bringing us to this season. And then since you've taken on Yom Kippur, you can't drink the wine, but a minor child could. A girl who's less than 12 years old, or a boy who's less than 13 years old. And then since you made a blessing, somebody has to taste that wine, lest you make a blessing in vain. So let the child taste the wine. But this is not a good plan, says the Gemara, because you would be training this child during his most impressionable years. The problem isn't that he's drinking wine. The problem is that he's drinking something on Yom Kippur. He technically could do that because he's not obligated in the laws. He's not obligated in the mitzvahs yet because he's a minor. But you don't want to train him to think, and we start Yom Kippur by drinking some wine, lest he become accustomed to that practice and later he make a mistake because that's the way he was trained. You would be putting a stumbling block before the blind. And so the law finally comes out that we do say Shechechyanu and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the same as we do for Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuos, but on Yom Kippur, we don't say it over wine. And these are things that are familiar to anybody who, has these holidays in their life. But now you know the reason that we do say Shechechyanu over Yom Kippur, at Yom Kippur, the beginning of Yom Kippur, but we don't say it with wine. Okay, let me see if we have comments or questions. Christine, what is the significance of apples and honey on Rosh Hashanah? The basic idea, and this is why we say Shana Tova Umetuka, a good year and a sweet year. So this is, kind of having a sort of tangible symbol of the idea that we're blessing God, and at the same time that we're blessing God and thanking Him for giving us Rosh Hashanah, making a request that it should be a sweet year, right? And as I said earlier today, and I've been saying for the last few days, last Rosh Hashana, we didn't know what was in store during the Hebrew year 5780, the year that today is its last day. God knew. God knew there was going to be a pandemic, and God knew there was going to be all the unrest, and God knew there was going to be the fires and the hurricanes and the floods and all the difficulties that have come upon us in this past year. We didn't know, but God knew. And God shocked us with all this and showed us that we're not in control, and we really need to be thankful for our blessings. So our prayer is that for the coming year, the Hebrew year 5781, may God shock us with the sweetness which is coming and which we do not yet know about. Please, God, shock us with the sweetness. Lynn says, I got here late. Do we perform the Hallel of Psalms on this Yom Tov day 1 and 2? I trust my Maksor will straighten me out when I get there. I'm not sure. I just hadn't looked that up. We do say Hallel for Rosh Hashana. Which day do we say it on? I'm just not sure, but your Maksor will definitely straighten you out. Sharon Frant Brooks, my father was raised in the shtetl and was very poor. His tradition was to say Shechechyanu every Shabbos at candle lighting, as he was grateful to make it alive each week from that time in his life onward. Wow, thank you for sharing that story. Isn't that incredible? Shechechyanu is really a beautiful, it's such a beautiful prayer, just thanking God that we're alive. There's a lot of people as they get older, they come, like when we're young and people say, hey, how you doing? You're like, oh, okay. And then as you get older and people say, how you doing? You can say, I'm alive. How bad could it be? I'm alive. And that's what that blessing is all about. And welcome Barbara Epperly, who's listening for the first time. It's great to have you in the community. That's what I've got for us today. My brothers and sisters, you should have such a sweet year. This coming year, may it shock you with all the blessings that should rain down upon you. Your worthy prayers should be answered. You should have health. You should have joy. You should have meaning. You should have success and prosperity. And if you haven't been doing it already, you really have to think about your income. You should tithe it, right? You should set aside 10% of your net income, right? Not your gross income, for people who understand the difference. But you should put aside 10% of your actual income that comes to you and give it to causes that you care about, that you believe in. Whatever the causes are that you believe in, when you set aside, like it's firm for you. The way we do it is 10% of every dollar that comes into our bank account, immediately we shift it into the Meiser account, the tithing account. And then it's just our job to deplete that tithe account by giving it to all kinds of causes that we believe in. As Nina mentioned earlier today, it's an especially good time to support organizations which promote Torah study, that share Torah with the world. Accidental Talmudist shares more Torah with more people than almost any organization out there. So it's big impact when you support us and enable us to do what we do, to produce a daily show, to get our message out there. These days, so much of what we do is on Facebook, and we have to compete with a lot of garbage that's going out there to try and inject some light into the darkness. So a lot of what we spend our nonprofit dollars on is marketing, just to literally reach people. We have to boost a lot of the posts to get them out and get them seen. So it's when you donate to donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, it's high impact dollars for your tithing. But we should certainly not be your only donations. You should pick the causes you believe in and give 10% of your income, and then God becomes your business partner. And I got to tell you that since we became strict about tithing, we've done better. And everyone will say the same thing. When you become strict about your tithing, you'll be surprised that overall your pie grows. That happens to everybody who really commits to that process. That's what I've got for us today. And I'm just going to, because it's only 90 seconds long, I'm going to play that Shechechyanu from our movie. Hold on a second. Our movie, show album, the Shechechyanu from When Do We Eat? Whoa, hold on a second. Let me get that speaker going, and we'll go out with that. Come on. There we go. And I love the tuba.